Even after 10 years, meeting your ex still feels kind of strange. Or maybe it doesn't if you don't still have feelings for her. And maybe it doesn't if the whole world isn't on the brink of war. I don't even know why I agreed to see Kat that day. My thoughts were still lingering on my work. My unit was responsible for the safety of one of the most important visitors Yara had seen in a long time. Joseph Banny, Foreign Minister of Drovia. Whatever came of his negotiations with our president could make or break the relationship between our planets for generations to come. Yet here I was, fighting with my ex about how often I should call my daughter, pretending that it mattered. As I started walking home, I felt angry at myself. Not for failing to show my daughter how much I cared for her, but for actually not caring as much as she would have deserved. At least that's what I thought I felt like at the time. I was under a lot of pressure due to Banny's visit, and I found it hard to think about anything other than work. I looked at my reflection in the glass and down at the layers of city below my feet. I'd almost told Kat how strange being in our old place still felt to me. I didn't want her to think I still missed her. Maybe I did, because something still hurt when I saw her. Although it might just have been the memory of not getting something we wanted, of having failed. As good as we may be at making sense of things, there are some we can't work into the narrative. Fuck! How could that happen? I didn't even dare think about the impending political aftermath. If this was indeed murder, it couldn't be. I hope there was a mistake. Maybe Gary had gone crazy. Maybe I was dreaming. Foreign Minister Banny's death could be the tipping point in the conflict between Yara and Drovia. This whole visit was meant to ease tensions between our planets. Now it could lead to war. The first interplanetary war. Fuck me, I'll snap out of it. You'll figure this out. Focus on the task ahead. It wasn't until I was on my way back to the train that I noticed the park's obscene size. The night was cool, and the Mansion District was probably the quietest place in the whole center. It was one of the last spots in the area where buildings hadn't been stacked on top of each other like toy blocks. My head was unusually clear, and to my surprise, I noticed that I was in a good mood. In retrospect, I believe that it stemmed from a sense of purpose driving me forward that night. I felt sorry for the old lady. Descending through the layers was easy these days if you didn't have one of the few jobs that still existed. Basic income wasn't enough for most people, even around here where living was relatively cheap. Although somehow our economy had never been more productive. Liam Campbell. Liam fucking Campbell. It had taken a moment until it clicked because I never called him that. To me and the rest of my division, he was just the chief. That's who the woman had tried to get close to. The director of national security at the CDI. My boss. Now what? Should I follow the chain of command and tell Gary? The chief probably wasn't too keen on everybody finding out about his habit. Maybe I should talk to him first. Then again, it might be too important for the case to be kept secret. As I was making my way back down through the maze of Matuna's living quarters, I tried to untangle the threads of the conspiracy before me. Every detail I uncovered seemed to open up a number of new questions. What exactly was the connection between the stolen data and Banny's murder? It felt like there was a bigger plan underneath, like we were just scratching the surface. Once the adrenaline had worn off, the uncomfortable train seat and glaring sunlight were the only things stopping me from falling asleep. My implants had been injecting me with a substance keeping me alert and focused all night, and now I came crashing down hard. I seemed to remember glances from the people around me. I wondered if there was blood on my clothes, but I couldn't be bothered to check. Agent Reed had been transported off in an ambulance. He had lost a lot of blood and was going in and out of consciousness. The projectile had pierced his vest somehow. I couldn't help but feel like this wouldn't have happened if I had submitted an accurate description of the sniper. At least we caught him and his associate. Whether dead or alive remained to be seen. I wondered if this was the beginning of the end of the case, or just its beginning. I finally got up at my stop and left the train, only to suddenly wake up in my seat again and realize it had been a dream. I decided to stand next to the door for the rest of the ride. A cool breeze cut into the train cart and through the haze of fatigue when the doors opened. I considered visiting Kat, suddenly feeling an urge to inhale the woody, slightly dusty air in our old apartment. Kat had filled it with what she affectionately called real things. She loved leather, cloth, paper, and plants, and hated the clean metallic surfaces at my apartment. Sometimes I did too. I got into the elevator and leaned against a wall. It hit me that I didn't want to see Kat because I had never really let her go, and that I probably should. We hadn't been together for a decade, and if anything was going to change about that, it would have probably happened at some point before. That's what I told myself, at least. I already knew I would get back to repressing the subject altogether once I was well rested enough to get my emotional defenses up again. Waking up in the early evening was disorienting. I sat up on my bed and allowed the memories from the previous night to pour back in. Banny's body, the hotel, Lila, the shootout. I tried to put it all in an order that made sense and got on my way back to work. A hint of the good mood that had overcome me outside of the villa returned. Once again, it stemmed from what had made me join the CDI many years ago. The feeling of doing something instead of taking a back seat and waiting for death. There was a time when a lack of purpose threatened to consume me, lurking underneath meaningless daily routines and self-doubt sabotaging everything I did. Walking among the people outside, I felt even more alienated than usual. It was like they lived in another reality. Many were just getting out of work, looking to do some shopping, meet a friend, have a drink. Maybe I would find my way back to that reality one day. I wanted to, yet at the same time hated the thought of it. During the train ride, every screen in the city had been playing news reports about the Liberators' announcement. They were the first violent domestic terror group with a political motive in recent Garian history. But there was something else that struck me about them. This wasn't the usual MO of a conservative group trying to maintain the status quo. It felt much more like revolutionaries hoping to effect change by resorting to drastic measures. On my way up to Moore's apartment, I walked through aromatic clouds of fried rice, fish, and mystery meat. I'd been down to Paloon Market once before, with Catherine. It almost surprised me to see that none of the platforms had collapsed in the years since. People were still selling the same junk, some of it probably stolen halfway across the planet. Oftentimes in our investigations, the obvious solution would turn out to be the right one. People usually acted in accordance with their interests and their emotions. Whoever we first thought did it, they often turned out to have done it. With Moore and everyone else we had met so far, it always felt that we were at least one step removed from the truth. Nothing about this case was obvious. Met my own tired gaze in the glass. There were so many things on my mind. Laura's disappearance worried me more than I had shown. I thought that maybe we should have let her go to that party. In hindsight, it probably wouldn't have mattered. And then there was Cox. He was somewhere out there. At the time, I was hopeful we'd catch him and get some much-needed answers, but he hasn't turned up to this day. As soon as the woman disappeared into the night, my facade slipped and I nearly collapsed on the balcony floor. I took out my cell with shaking hands and tapped on Laura's face in my contacts. Maybe. She didn't pick up. I resisted the urge to call Catherine next. I couldn't just tell her about what had happened. She knocked on my door in the early morning, but I didn't open. I tried to decide on a course of action, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind alternated between trying to remember my last conversation with Laura and conjuring up horrible images of her tied to a chair in some basement. Sometime later, my alarm rang. I got up to go to work, not sure if I was ready to talk to Kat. I must have stood outside her apartment for a few minutes when I finally made a decision. Once again enveloped by the smell of the market, I thought back to the man I had been when Kat had brought me here. How did it all go so wrong? Deep down, I knew the answer. I was just too scared to commit to my family. It was so much easier to care about something that didn't have to like you back. That wouldn't go away if you didn't want it to. For me, that was my job. But ironically, protecting myself like that only made it hurt so much worse. Now that Laura was out of my reach, the pain of being separated was only amplified by the knowledge that I had missed so many opportunities to be with her. You may be asking yourself how I remained functional throughout all of this. How I didn't just collapse under the pressure and the looming prospect of losing my daughter forever. I think the truth is that over the years, I had gotten really good at tuning out the voice that always tormented me, that had always told me horrible shit. This was just adding to it. More to repress, more bubbling beneath the surface. Maybe if it had gone on for long enough, I would have imploded sooner or later. After I woke up, I stared at the ceiling for a while. Zora's words rang in my head. 7 o'clock tonight. I had to do what they asked of me, but I wasn't sure where the data they wanted was stored. I was running out of time. I sat up and made a decision. The sheet on the Liberators. I needed to complete it now. I had a feeling that all the puzzle pieces were there. If I found out who was in charge of the Liberators, I might finally understand what the data was all about and where to look for it. Or maybe I could force them to pay Zora's boss so he'd let Laura go. Over the years at the CDI, I had seen some pretty bad shit. Homicide, mass suicide, human trafficking, rape. Some of those memories were burnt into my brain, but I never knew in the moment if something would stick with me or not. This was different. I knew right away I would never forget the sight of those mangled corpses under the rubble. The sight alone was horrid, but the worst part was the gnawing feeling that I could have prevented all this. The way Gary had gone off on Moore made me think that deep down he felt the same. I was supposed to write a report on my findings in the Liberator's case, but I wasn't able to concentrate for even a second. First, I needed to wait for my colleagues to go home to be alone with Saito. He always worked late. But then what? What if he refused to help me? The idea of having to force him was devastating. He was my friend, after all. When I finally managed not to think about it anymore, a much more dire thought crept up on me. Laura might die tonight. And if she did, it would be my fault. I was supposed to write a report on my findings in the Liberator's case, but I wasn't able to concentrate for even a second. First, I needed to wait for my colleagues to go home to be alone with Saito. He always worked late. But then what? What if he refused to help me? The idea of having to force him was devastating. He was my friend, after all. When I finally managed not to think about it anymore, a much more dire thought crept up on me. Laura might die tonight. And if she did, it would be my fault. And that's it. The most tumultuous days of my life, and possibly in Garian history. We never did find out who was behind the Liberators. I had gotten so close, but ultimately, we weren't able to present enough evidence to convict anyone. There was something we must have missed. Luckily, the Liberators never launched another attack or made another statement. They just vanished into thin air. With the case still unsolved, I'm pretty sure Gary will never make chief now. The Liberators remain an active threat, even though there hasn't been another attack yet. I never got a look at that data, even though I have an idea of what it might have been about. Maybe someday the truth will come out. The CDI has suspended me without pay until further notice, and I might face criminal charges. As for my career at the CDI, the director had a serious talk with me, but it looks like I can keep my job if I want to. The fact that I had forced Saito at gunpoint to hack the CDI and didn't even back down when he offered me an out, that didn't land too well with my bosses. And I admit, I could have asked the CDI for help instead, but I didn't trust them enough at the time. Of course, saying that in my defense didn't make it better. Laura is gone once again. She is somewhere out there. I know it. I will not rest until I find her, or until the people who captured her put a bullet through my head. I will not let them turn her the way they turned Zora. As for me, I somehow got out of all of it alive. The CDI picked me up and found a bullet in my spine that has left me paralyzed from the waist down, possibly for the rest of my life. I worry that I'll never see the city from our old roof ever again. Catherine and I haven't talked in a while. I think our relationship is over once and for all, and it's probably for the best. And finally, Zora. There was a moment when I thought she might have changed. I saw hesitation in her eyes, or maybe it was all in my head. She and her people are still roaming free, probably right here in the city of Gara. I have a feeling that if we ever cross paths again, only one of us might walk away.
Late in the evening, the lights are still there.